Hi there, it's November the 11th and we are continuing our journeying through the book of Ezekiel, through the prophecies of Ezekiel, in Hebrew Yehezkel, meaning the Lord strengthens. And here we come to one of the most shocking chapters in the scripture, one of the most explicit sexually in the whole scripture, and it's Ezekiel chapter 23. The Lord speaks to Ezekiel in this chapter and tells him to tell the story of two sisters, the daughters of one mother. And he's referring to Jerusalem and Judah and to Israel, the northern territory. And so he has the names of the two sisters are Aholah and Aholibah. And Aholah represents Samaria, represents Shomron, the northern capital, and Aholibah represents Jerusalem. And basically, without going into very much detail, the two sisters give themselves to whoring. First of all, when they're down in Egypt, and it talks about the origins of Israel in that sense being in Egypt, but there they worshipped idols, and the explicitness is that Ezekiel portrays this idolatry as sexual connection, as sexual pleasuring. And the words are very explicit here, and it's quite shocking to read in many ways, but it just conveys something of God's anger and God's unhappiness and God's sadness and all of the things that would come with a husband who's been spurned by a wife and a woman and a daughter who's gone after prostitution. And yet she's become no better. They've become no better, and so now they've given themselves to Assyria, they've given themselves to Egypt, they've even given themselves to Babylon, and they've gone after these Gelolim, these dung-gods, these things which are not gods at all, and they've prostituted themselves to these idols, to these blocks, to these senseless things. And because of this, this giving themselves, they're going to be the people of Israel and Judah are going to be they're going to be punished. They're going to have judgment come upon them. In fact, they're going to be made ugly. Those who've been beautiful, who've been giving themselves to their prostitution, are going to be made ugly, and they're going to be chased. And the Lord's heart is broken over this, because this is the daughters, these are the daughters who he raised, these are the daughters who we saw in earlier chapters, that God saw them and rescued them and wanted to raise them. There is such a sadness here in this chapter, because Aholah and Aholibah were those who were covenanted to God, and yet they turned against the covenant and went off with these other idols. Sometimes we don't see idolatry, we don't see putting other things in place of God as that serious. But this chapter 23 of Ezekiel, as I say, the most explicit perhaps chapter in the scriptures, just shows the devastating effect on the relationship with God of putting other things before him, of putting other things in place of God. We need to be constantly assaying our own hearts, constantly weighing our own hearts and asking the Lord, Lord, am I purely yours? Am I wholly yours? Is there anything that is rivaling for my attention, that rivals your love and devotion to you? Let's be sure today that we are giving God the whole devotion of our hearts, that we're not giving ourselves in any way to those things which are not God. Have a very good November the 11th.